I was talking to a congregant just this week in my office, and the conversation turned to how we're spending Advent this year. And they had mentioned to me that they'd never spent an Advent season in their many years in church in the Gospel of John. And I said, so how's that been different for you? And they used two words about how they have experienced it that start with the letter E, that I wonder if it's been that way for you too. The words they use to describe seeing Christmas through the lens of the Gospel of John is that it becomes epic and expansive. Is that how it feels? It should, if I'm doing a decent job of talking about these opening 18 verses. I mentioned last week that part of what John is doing is he is addressing some of the deepest questions that all human beings, no matter where they are or when they are, ask at some point, and really all throughout their lives. What's on God's mind? What is God doing in the world? What's God saying? What would he say to me? What's God's timeless playbook for human life? One that can hold secure no matter how chaotic my circumstances may be. And the gift of Jesus that we celebrate every Christmas is God's answer to those questions. Today we're just going to talk about one verse. And then we're going to track the themes that this one verse introduces throughout the rest of the Gospel of John. This is John chapter 1, verse 5, which reads, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." I haven't as yet in this series pointed out to you that there is a particular sequence, a chronology, if you will, to the first 18 verses of the Gospel of John. The first 3 or 4 verses refer all the way back to our primordial past and creation itself. And by the time you hit verses 6 to 8, you run into the person of John the Baptist, who paves the way for Jesus. And then beginning in verse 9, going all the way through verse 18, you have the coming and ministry and work of Jesus himself. Now here's why that's important when you read verse 5. This struggle between light and darkness precedes Jesus. In fact, he was born into it. There's probably a Christmas passage in the Bible that you've never heard taught during Advent. In fact, if somebody has heard this passage taught during Advent, I'm going to buy you Starbucks. You just tell me afterward that you did. It's in the book of Revelation, the beginning of Revelation chapter 12, in which we are told there is a great woman in heaven, not Mary, refers to Israel. And this great woman in heaven is pregnant and about to give birth. And she has an enemy in heaven, and it is a great dragon. And as she prepares to give birth and her promised child is about to enter the world, yes, referring to Jesus, that great dragon prepares to eat that child. And it is only by God's grace and goodness that that child is spared from the evil that wants to assault and consume him. Never heard Christmas talked about like that, right? The struggle between light and darkness preceded Jesus, and he was born into it, as if a dragon waited to eat him. Please note, by the way, in verse 5 of John 1, the tense of the verb shines. Now, why would I point out such an obscure thing? It is the only verb, the only major verb in the first 18 verses of John that's in the present tense. Now that's weird, because he's pointing us backward to something that has always existed, that has existed since, it seems, the beginning of time, the struggle between light and darkness. So shouldn't it read shined, not shines? His point is just this. Whoever you are when you read my gospel, you need to assume that this struggle between light and darkness exists in your day, and you are involved and in it as much as anybody else ever before you. Light has shined in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Light is still shining in the darkness, and the darkness, try as it might, still cannot topple it. So pause with me and reflect. What you realize when you take John chapter 1, verse 5 seriously is that you and I will live every day of our earthly lives in a war zone, just like Jesus did. And interestingly, here's what I know about that subject. I don't have to tell you about it in order to convince you of it. You sense it all on your own. Light and darkness, the pairing of light and darkness, are what we call in psychology and anthropology and the study of literature, archetypes. What's an archetype? It's an image for deep philosophical, spiritual, moral things that exists all over the globe in cultures that have never talked to each other. So no matter where you go, from east to west, north and south, no matter where it is you land in human history, you can find human beings using the language of light and darkness about their experience here on planet Earth. This is why the eminent psychologist Carl Jung would say light and darkness is part of what he called our collective unconsciousness. We share a sensibility and sensitivity to the language of light and darkness, and we don't have to be taught it. It's almost as if we're born with it. This is why any painter, any poet, any writer, any singer-songwriter who uses the language of light and darkness in their music or what they're writing knows that the instant they use the language, light and darkness, something deep happens in those who are listening. You are tapping into the deepest parts of how human beings try to interpret their life here on earth. All of us know we live in a struggle between light and darkness. How have you experienced that in your years here on earth? Is it perhaps that no matter how long you've lived, you notice that the world continues to struggle with the same problems? And it sure doesn't seem like we're making much headway. And several hundred years ago, poverty and discrimination and injustice was a problem, and poverty and discrimination and injustice are just as much a problem, even if they've changed forms a little bit in our day. It sure does seem like darkness is vying with the light. Or you notice the lives of others around you who seem like they're completely trapped by the thinking and values of the culture around them, so much so that they don't know to stand back and think about what it is they're doing or how they're living or what they're valuing. They seem as if they've given away their very power of choice. It sure does seem like darkness is fighting against the light in their lives. But you sense it in yourself too. This is why you reflect back on your life and go, man, I thought at this point of my life I'd be better at this. And I wouldn't still be struggling with the same insecurities and fears in here that I was 20 years ago. This is because you live in a world of light and dark, and you will spend every moment of your life on that battlefield. And to paraphrase or adapt a famous saying by the Russian Christian philosopher and social critic Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the line between light and darkness runs through every human heart. Light and darkness, you sense this. You know it. A couple of chapters later, Jesus speaking to Nicodemus, who comes to visit him by night, says to him some things that are extraordinarily profound about the nature of darkness. This is John chapter 3, verses 19 to 20. Jesus speaking. And this is the judgment of the world, that the light has come into the world, and people love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For all who do evil hate the light and do not come to the light, so that their deeds may not be exposed. So what is darkness like? This darkness that has been fighting against light from time immemorial. It is far too simplistic to say it is merely evil. No, the darkness cannot stand the light. Why? Because it's afraid of it. And why is darkness afraid of the light? Because anything that comes to the light will be exposed. And the strategy, the tactics of darkness is for you to try to stay hidden. To live in the lies and the half-truths that all of us, me included, tell ourselves. This is what darkness is really like. And because it would rather choose its own dishonesty about itself rather than the light of Jesus, it fights against God's light. There's a Christian psychologist by the name of David Benner who puts it this way: all human beings have parts of themselves that they are trying to hide from view. From view of others, for sure, but even from their own eyes. Even from God's prying eyes. And they spend so much energy and time trying to build up a facade and tell a lie about who they are. And the more you hide something, the more its power grows in the shadows, he says. Those things that we consciously avoid, he writes, are the things that tyrannize us. What are you trying to hide? Those are your dark places. And each of us has those. And Jesus says, come to the light. Let those things be exposed. We are people of the light here, yes? We are people who follow Jesus here. Therefore, church, a gathering of people of the light, of all people on earth, should be people who don't hide in the darkness. One of the great writers on spiritual formation in our day is named Richard Foster. He puts it this way: if we as Christians who are known as the people of God will be first and foremost a fellowship of sinners, then we are freed to hear the unconditional call of God's love and confess our deep needs openly before our brothers and sisters. For then we know that we are not alone in our sin. The fear and pride which cling to us like barnacles cling to others as well. We are sinners, one and the same. When we admit this, we release the power that heals. The strategy of darkness is to tell you that you need to hide. And Christ has come to say, come to the light. Let me see, because only then can you be healed. Go back to John chapter 1, verse 5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Jesus says something similar in John chapter 8, verse 12. Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Then again in John chapter 12, verses 35 and 46, Jesus said to them, the light is with you for a little while longer. Walk while you have the light, so the darkness may not overtake you. I have come as light in the world, so that everyone who believes in me should not remain in darkness. Come to the light. This is Jesus' offer. So that the darkness that has been fighting against the light since the creation of the world will not overtake you. Jesus offers you a choice. Will you live in the shadows of your life that you are trying to keep hidden, or will you come to his light? And this is an unequal fight. The darkness has been vying against the light from the beginning of time. And to date, it has not overcome it, nor will it. The darkness has fought against the light. The darkness is fighting against the light. The darkness will fight against the light. And at every time, every point, it will fail. We're a big Lord of the Rings family. My son's full name is Elisar. We call him Eli so he doesn't get made fun of in school. On several occasions, his teachers have thought he's Hispanic. No, it's Elvish. It was a big deal in my family when The Lord of the Rings was made into movies. The last movie of which is The Return of the King. Darkness or evil in The Lord of the Rings movies and books is symbolized by Sauron, this flaming evil eye. And at the end of The Return of the King, the tower on which this great eye resides crumbles to the ground as Frodo finally tosses the ring into the fires of Mordor. And my wife wept. And I said, now, it's not uncommon for Heather to weep at movies. But there was something deeper about this. I said, Heather, what's wrong? She says, I get it. This is light winning, and this is darkness failing. J.R.R. Tolkien writes in Sam's song in the Return of the King, quote, I do not believe this darkness will endure. Above all shadows rides the sun, and stars forever dwell. I will not say the day is done, nor bid the stars farewell. Light prevails. And Jesus' offer is for you to come and join the light. You will not find life in the darkness. You have to come to the light in order to find all that is good and deep and rich in life. So come to the light, Jesus says. See, it doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter how long you've lived. You can still come to the light. Even if you've been a Christian a long time, you can still take one more step toward the light. Young or old, poor or rich, it does not matter. Just come to the light. And Jesus says, the darkness will not overtake you, and you will find life. There's a poet by the name of Mark Strand who writes about this in a poem entitled, The Coming of the Light. Even this late, it can happen. The coming of love, the coming of light. You wake and the candles are lit as if by themselves. Stars gather, dreams pour into your pillows, sending up warm bouquets of air. Even this late, the bones of your body can shine, and tomorrow's dust flares into breath. Come to the light. I'd like you to pause here with me at the end of the message and just give God some space to speak to you. We've talked about very deep things, primordial things that human beings have thought about and wrestled with for our entire history. And John says that Jesus is right there in the middle of this eternal fight between light and darkness. Take a minute, maybe use one of those questions up on the screen, and in the quiet, pray them to God and be open to his response. And then, after a moment or two, I will pray for us all. Father in heaven, John has put into words what we sense about our world and our lives. There is a war going on, and we live within it. We are part of it, between light and darkness. Father, may we hide in the darkness no more, for our hiding is the cause of so much wrongdoing and mischief in our own lives. Instead, we say together that we will come to the light. For when we come to your light, we are coming to your love, and there is no fear in your love. In this may we find life and great freedom, and for this we thank you, the gift of Jesus the light that the darkness cannot topple. Amen.